Welcome back, my fellow peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to this channel or to this podcast. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. So today we're going to delve into the life and the crimes of one of the most infamous domestic terrorists in American history. Can you guess who I'm going to be talking about today? So we're going to be talking about Ted Kaczynski. He's also known as the Unabomber. Now, over this episode, we're going to explore his early life, his descent into isolation, and the terror he would unleash upon the USA. Our state is going to be Montana. Whilst there are no known victims of murder that are killed there, it's where his descent into madness began. And he also did terrorize his actual neighbors in Montana. So I do think this is actually quite valid in the fact that we're picking this state. You are going to see today there is a Meggie dog, there is a Charlie dog, and there is a Frankie too. He's probably going to go up the stairs. So you're probably going to see Frankie today. You will probably see Oscar, because if Frankie goes upstairs, Oscar is definitely going to go up there. So I'm really excited about today's episode. You guys need to go and watch whatever you do, the Netflix special, The Unabomber in his own words. It's really good. It's really, really insightful. It gives heaps of information from the FBI to his brother, David Kaczynski, who we're going to be talking about in depth later into the episode. But it's a really good insight into him as well, because there was interviews with him conducted, and he was able to sort of give his own perspective. And by the way, guys, that is not me having any type of opinion towards it or agreeing with him, but he had a lot to say, and it was really, really interesting to watch. So if I can say anything to anybody, you need to go and watch that Netflix docu. Now, Ted Kaczynski was born on May 22nd in 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were Polish Americans. There was Wanda and Theodore Kaczynski. At around the age of 6 months old, he was covered in hives. So he was placed in isolation in the hospital where visitors were not allowed. Now, apparently, treatment went over the course of 8 months. His mother would write in 1943 that baby home from hospital and is healthy but quite unresponsive after his experience. He then attended the Sherman Elementary in Chicago from grades 1 to 4 and Evergreen Park Central from grades 5 to 8. He had an IQ, I kid you not, he had an IQ of 167. So he would end up actually skipping the 6th grade. I would say, and this is a bad comparison, but very Sheldon-like in the respect of his IQ and also his mannerisms. It would significant because he skipped 6th grade. He was so much far behind emotionally, and he really didn't fit in with his peers. So he experienced a lot of bullying. He had a fear of people. He would prefer to play alone. His mum had actually considered enrolling him in a study for autistic children just due to his social development. Now, as someone who was almost a year behind everybody else in high school and primary school, I can definitely relate to this in the respect of just that isolation. You are emotionally not nearly as mature as the other people in your class, and you do feel that age gap in high school. This is just my own personal experience, obviously, but it was definitely, you could feel that you were younger. Obviously, it was a lot worse for him, but I can relate to that significance of sort of wanting to play alone a little bit. He would end up attending the Evergreen Park Community High School. He found maths way too easy. He was obsessed with it almost. He would spend hours practicing differential equations. He massively surpassed all of his peers. He was mastering advanced Laplace transforms before his senior year. He then skipped 11th grade, so he would finish school at the age of 15, high school at the age of 15, and he would be attending Harvard at the age of 16. Again, guys, this is really significant. Sorry, Meggie is just getting herself comfortable. So you can see our Meggie girl. She's 12 years old. She's a little old soul. Imagine going to college at the age of 16. You are so significantly far behind in maturity. It would really, I would struggle. just myself. I'm going to take a sip of my Fanta grape. By the way, anything soda, I sound American, anything soft drink related, I love grape, absolutely love it. It is probably the most sugary taste on the planet. When I used to go to the States and visit my dad, my stepmom would have the best collection of soft drink and soda in her fridge. So that's where I think I got a little bit of my love for the grape soda. Sorry, deviated once again. So Kaczynski would attend Harvard as a maths prodigy. He lived at 8 Prescott Street during his first year, and that was a house that was really designed for the youngest and the most gifted students. But after that, he actually resided at Eliot House. So his peers would describe him as highly intelligent, but really socially reserved. He graduated in 1962 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics and a GPA of 3.12. Now, Dr. Henry Murray, in his second year at Harvard, Dr. Henry Murray was an expert on stress interviews, and he would conduct a multiple-year personality study that had been sponsored by the CIA. Ted would engage in this. So students participating in this study were initially told that they'd be debating personal philosophy with another student. However, they were instead subjected to purposely brutalizing psychological experiment stress test. It was extremely stressful, personal, and prolonged, and it involved several intense procedures. Now, during the test, students were taken into a room. They were strapped into a chair and they were connected to electrodes that monitored their physiological reactions. They faced bright lights, a two-way mirror. Each student had previously written an essay detailing their personal beliefs and aspirations. These essays were handed over to an anonymous attorney who would then enter the room and individually belittle each student based on the disclosures that they'd made in those essays. It was all filmed, and the students' expressions of impotent rage were played back to them multiple times during this study. Now, according to an author by the name of Alston Chase, records from that period suggest that Ted was emotionally unstable when the study began. So he was already emotionally, I don't want to use this word, but broken. And this study possibly made it worse. His lawyers, though, during the trial, they would attribute some of the emotional instability and the dislike of mind control to his participation in particular to this study. Definitely, though, I would say some have suggested that this experience may have been instrumental in his future actions. Personally, my opinion, I don't really know. I would like to probably read up a bit more on what this study was. I think it was touched on in the documentary, but I think it probably needed to be touched on a little bit more. I definitely think an experience like this would alter your mind. He would graduate Harvard University in 1962. Then he would go for a PhD in mathematics at the University of Michigan. His area of expertise was geometric function theory and a branch of complex analysis. It's a mouthful and a half. Sorry, guys. His professors at Michigan would say they were highly impressed with his intellect and dedication. Now, his thesis was boundary functions and solved a particularly challenging problem that even the Pyrenean could not solve. Another one of his professors would actually note that only a few people in the country could understand or appreciate his actual thesis. So very, very intelligent, very, very analytical, very maths focused at this stage. So in 1967, he received the University of Michigan's $100 Summer B. Myers Prize for the best mathematics dissertation of the year. Now, it's during his time at Michigan that he held the National Science Foundation Fellowship. He taught undergraduates for 3 years, and he published several articles in relation to his dissertation. At some point in later 1967, he became an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California in Berkeley, making him the youngest professor that had ever been hired by that university. His tenure, though, was really short-lived. He had numerous amounts of complaints and low ratings from his students who found him fairly uncomfortable when he was teaching. He often stuttered, he mumbled during lectures, and he ignored students during the office hours. So I think that's that social interaction. He's not fabulous at it. So I don't think he was probably good at teaching. He would have been much better, perhaps. Very beautiful mind, Nash, working on mathematical equations and stuff like that. You'll just have to excuse me. I'm just going to open up Dad's line so that the pup dogs can go out. Just excuse me. So he actually resigns from his position at Berkeley at the age of 26. It was really quite sudden and very unexpected, especially by the mathematics department. I would remark his colleagues and his the chairman would also say that his impressive thesis and publication record could have led him to become a senior faculty member. So he was on the pathway to becoming like a leading faculty member in mathematics and probably changing the world of mathematics. So him leaving was a real disservice to the mathematics area. That's my personal belief. Also the fact that he became the Unabomber, kind of awkward. So one of Ted's major inspirations was a poet by the name of Henry David Thoreau. He had famously built a cabin in the wilderness and he'd lived off the land. So he wanted to emulate him. So he constructed a very similar cabin in Montana. He would live in isolation from 1971 until his arrest. Now, despite his reclusive lifestyle, his interactions were marked by mistrust and paranoia. He often had few friendships and often felt persecuted by those around him. So in Montana, with his limited social interactions, they were always on his terms. He was known to be a dangerous neighbour, though. He engaged in acts of sabotage, things like ruining equipment because he didn't like the noise from his neighbours from the wood chipping business. He would set traps to injure the motorbike guys and the four-wheelers around the area. And he would, his writings that they found later after his arrest they'd stipulate that he actually contemplated murdering his neighbours. So interviews with his family members, which included his mum and his brother David, he needed a constant need for apologies for his perceived wrongs. And when they were done, none of them were satisfactory to him. So this definitely strained his relationship with his family, but particularly his brother David, because once he announced his marriage plans, it just sort of further isolated Ted. He didn't really want to interact with them. So this is where we're going to begin the story of how he became known as the Unabomber. So between 1978 and 1995, Kaczynski mailed or hand-delivered a series of increasingly sophisticated bombs that would end up killing 3 people and injure 23. 16 bombs have been linked to him, apparently. Now, while the bombing devices varied wildly throughout the years, many of them consisted of the initials FC, which Kaczynski would later say that it stood for Freedom Club, which was inscribed in the parts on the inside of the bomb. He purposely would leave misleading clues in the devices, and he took extreme care in avoiding leaving any fingerprints. Fingerprints that were found on some of the devices, they were never matched to Ted Kaczynski. In 1978, the FBI noticed Kaczynski when his first homemade bomb exploded. So over 17 years, the bombs became increasingly sophisticated. Now, in May 1978, he sent a mail bomb to Professor Buckley Christ at the Northwest University. Now, found with the return address in a parking lot, it was returned to him. So Chris noticed that it wasn't his handwriting and asked the campus policeman, Terry Marker, to open it up, and it unfortunately exploded and it caused injuries that required medical assistance. Now, this bomb was made from a piece of metal pipe about 1 inch in diameter and 9 inches long. It contained smokeless explosive powders, and the ends of the pipe were sealed with handcrafted wooden plugs, and it lacked the strength to actually allow significant pressure to build. So it resulted in creating less damage. The trigger mechanism was a nail tensioned by rubber bands, and it's designed to strike 6 match heads upon opening the box, which ignites the explosive powders. However, only 3 of those match heads actually lit. Later, Ted would actually use a much more efficient technique involving batteries and a heat filament wire to ignite explosives more effectively. So our first victim was a campus policeman. On May 9th in 1979, John G. Harris, a civil engineering graduation student at the Northwestern University, opened a cigar-shaped box marked Phillies that exploded. Again, this one only caused minor injuries, and the bomber had upgraded from a rubber band trigger to a battery-operated filament wire to ignite chemicals and match heads. Now, despite removing identifying material from the batteries, wires, lamp cord, fishing, the bomb was still underpowered, so it spared lives. But it was definitely the next one that had aimed for greater impact. In 1979, an FBI-led task force that included ATF and the US Postal Inspection Service was formed to investigate the case after the American Airlines. The task force would actually grow to more than 150 full-time investigators, analysts, and others. The team had made every possible forensic examination of recovered components of the explosives and studied the lives of the victims right down to minute details. Now, these efforts really, they did prove to be quite useless in identifying a suspect. He built his bombs essentially from scrap metals available almost everywhere. The victims they would learn later were chosen irregularly and from library research. Now, it is known that he would go around the areas of where he lived in Montana, and that's where he would pick up all the different scrap metals and stuff like that. So he was essentially hiding his identity in plain sight. So in 1980, FBI agent John Douglas, he's working at the Behavioral Science Unit, he issued a psychological profile of an unidentified bomber, which described the offender as a man with average intelligence with connections to academia. This profile was later refined to characterize the offender as a neo-Luddite holding an academic degree in the hard sciences, but this psychologically based profile was discarded in 1983 in favor of an alternative theory developed by FBI analysts that concentrated on the physical evidence in the recovered bomb fragments. In this rival profile, right, the bomber was characterized as a blue-collar airplane mechanic. A hotline was set up during the time of the task force, with a $1 million reward for anyone who could provide information that would lead to the Unabomber's capture. So our next bomb is on American Airlines Flight 444, and it originated in Chicago. Its passengers were en route to Washington, and they suddenly heard a loud thud. It was in the baggage area of the plane. Now, a rigged household barometer in a parcel acted as an altimeter. Now, it would ignite gunpowder when the plane reached 35,500 feet, causing a bomb to smoulder in the whole of the baggage compartment. Smoke would fill the cabin, it would trigger oxygen mask, and it forced an emergency landing in Virginia. Now, passengers and crew evacuated via those escape slides, and 12 were hospitalized for smoke inhalation. The explosion source was a homemade bomb mailed from Chicago, suggesting that it wasn't a specific attack on the American Airlines. Now, 2 more agencies at this stage, like we discussed before, would join services. So it's US Postal Service and it's FBI. And the reason for that was it was actually crossing state lines. So there's a lot of talk that the overlap of authority would often hinder and delay the Unabomber's arrest. So information wasn't shared amongst the agencies, and investigators focused only on their suspects. I agree and disagree with this, because I think it happens, and especially because it's a little bit of a pissing contest is probably the best way I can put it, because those kind of disputes of we're going to solve this case, you're not going to solve this case, and it's about wanting credit for solving the crime, and it would lead to like over 500,000 suspects over the period of time. So it's gaining a lot of momentum, but they're still no closer to even identifying who this person was. So on June 10th in 1980, the United Airlines president, Percy Wood, had just celebrated his 60th birthday when he would receive a parcel in his home at Lake Forest in Illinois. And he opened up a book. A device concealed its hollowed-out pages, and it would explode. Bits of metal and wood fragments flashed through the air, piercing anything, the first things that they could hit. He sustained damage to his hands, his face, and his thigh, where a large chunk of metal was actually lodged. This was something new, though, because the bomber had actually learned to start signing his work. So the initials FC were punched into the metal bomb, meaning Freedom Club, obviously. This signature would reappear over time. After his accident in 1980, the FBI would name the case Unabomber, Universities and Airlines Bombing. So UN and A from Airlines and BOM, so Unabomber. That's how it all came about, from something as simple as university and airline bombs. So again, interesting. I would have thought unsub, but okay, sure. It's always really, really interesting to me that there's all these FBI profiles. Everyone's getting on board, but it doesn't seem to. And maybe it's because he was such a recluse that it never occurred to people that this was going on. It seemed like the bomber initially had a thing against universities, and then he's got a thing against airlines. It's very interesting to see the way that goes. So after 16 months of no bombings, authorities had actually speculated the Chicago bomber was dead, jailed, or had committed suicide. Unfortunately, though, on October 8th in 1981, a bomb with the FC signature was found and defused in the University of Utah. But this was followed again by another silence of 7 months. In May 1982, a package was mailed from Brigham Young University to a Patrick Fisher at Penn State. He hadn't taught there for over 2 years. The package was then forwarded to the Vanderbilt University and was opened by Secretary Janet Smith while Fisher was actually teaching in Puerto Rico. The explosion itself seriously injured her face, her arms, and it would result in her being hospitalized. The parcel had inadequate postage and was sent with the intent to be returned to the electrical engineering professor Leroy Wood Burnson, who knew nothing about it. It was Miss Smith's unfortunate timing that would actually lead to her opening up that package. 2 months later, the Unabomber struck again, this time at Berkeley in California. This one was on July 2nd in 1982. Professor Angelakis entered the Corey Hall faculty lounge for the math and computer science staff. He spotted an unusual piece of equipment with a gouge and a metal container, and it featured like a handsaw-like handle. When he would lift the handle, a pipe bomb had been placed inside the metal can and it had exploded. Almost instantly, metal shrapnel and the sheer force of the blast would cause serious damage to his face, his hands, and his arm. Flesh was actually torn from his fingers and tendons were decimated. Horrendous injuries to this man. The container itself contained gasoline, and that had not ignited into it hadn't ignited, because that could have been far more devastating with a fireball. So later the professor would say the idiot filled the tank to the top and didn't leave enough air for the gasoline to explode. Again, the Unabomber had signed his handiwork with amateurism and perhaps a little bit more. A fragment of paper had survived the blast. On it, the Unabomber had typed, "It works. I told you it would, RV." It made really no sense at the time. It turned out the Unabomber had attempted to implicate one of his previous Berkeley colleagues, Hung Hesse, Hung Wu, and Robert Vaught. For 3 years, the bombings had stopped. But then the Unabomber would return to haunt this professor once again. I'm guessing that the reason he stopped for a period of time was he was absolutely terrorizing his neighbors in Montana. He had much more things. He was writing his manifesto, which we'll come back to in a second. But there was all these things that it builds up over time. He was not consistently sending a bomb every year or every month or anything like that. Ted Kaczynski was really, really thorough and I'm wondering if at the time that he's doing this, and I probably have to go and watch the documentary again to know exactly what was going through his head, but I imagine for me that he was fine-tuning all of his skills when it comes to bomb making. He was practicing, he was doing all that kind of stuff. So on May 15th in 1985, Air Force captain and Berkeley grad student John Hauser entered a computer lab at Berkeley. There he noticed an out-of-place 3-ring binder near his computer. When he would open up the binder, it exploded. This was probably the Unabomber's most effective act of terrorism. It resulted in several injuries to John. He lost 4 fingers, suffered partial vision loss in his left eye, and experienced severe medical nerve damage. Now, blood was actually spurting from an artery in his arm, and he screamed for help. It was there that Professor Angelikos, the Unabomber's last victim, quickly fashioned a tourniquet out of his tie, and someone called 911 really quickly. Unfortunately, John Hauser wanted to become an astronaut, and this was what would eventually hinder him from becoming there. He later detailed his injuries, and he noticed a significant divot in his forearm and that his fingers were missing 2 sections. That was the first time the Unabomber had really caused a severe amount of damage. And whilst he caused horrible injuries to other people, this was the one that we saw defects happen. Now, inspectors would find that during his 3-year break, he had definitely improved his skills in bombs and explosives. He used ammonium nitrate with aluminium powder. American talk coming through there. He filled the pipe bombs with tacks, lead bits, and nails for shrapnel. He stamped an FC on the end of the seal. Now, they were no closer to apprehending him than they were 7 years earlier, and they were growing increasingly worried that the fatalities might start to occur now unless they stopped him. On June 13th in 1985, a Boeing mailroom clerk in Auburn, Washington, flagged a suspicious parcel addressing to the Boeing's fabrication division. He sent it to Oakland 5 weeks earlier. It was sent from Oakland, California, 5 weeks earlier without a specific recipient, and it was investigated really quickly by the bomb squad. X-rays revealed that there was explosive inside. The return address was Weiberg Tool and Supply, which was fake. Now, this device gave technicians their first detailed look at the Unabomber's new designs before it was dismantled and destroyed. Now, it marked the Unabomber's final attack on the airline industry and his last aborted assault. Unfortunately, though, it would start to get worse for the university departments. So in November 1985, University of Michigan psychology professor James McConnell received a package at his Ann Arbor home. It was sent from Ralph Kloppenberg from the University of Utah, and with a letter urging McConnell to read the enclosed book. Requests to read unsolicited material, they're not really unusual. However, it was actually his assistant, Nick, that opened the package when it exploded, and this would injure his arm and his midsection. He actually needed urgent medical help and later remarked that he was lucky compared to others who lost fingers, limbs, and lives. Though he temporarily lost his hearing due to the loud explosion, it would return to normal after 3 months. Unfortunately for Professor McConnell, who was nearby, he suffered partial loss of hearing that day, and sadly for a man who loved music, that damage ended up being permanent. Sorry, I'm just going to take another sip. Now, unfortunately, the next one would be the first time the Unabomber took a life. Not the last, though. In late 1985, a nail and splinter loaded bomb in the parking lot of a computer store in Sacramento, California, killed the 38-year-old store owner, Hugh Scruton. On February 1987, a bomb disguised as a piece of lumber injured Gary Wright in the parking lot of a computer store in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it would actually sever nerves in his left arm, and it would have at least 200 pieces of shrapnel entering his body. Kaczynski was actually spotted while he was planting this bomb. This led to a very this led to a wildly distributed sketch of a suspect as a hooded man with a mustache and aviator glasses. Got that up in the background. Everybody has seen it. The world would not hear more from the Unabomber for another 6 years, but unfortunately, before he was caught, he would injure 2 more people and as well as kill 2 more. Now, fun story or fun fact for this is that Gary Wright was contacted after Ted Kaczynski was caught by David, and they would actually become, he would apologize and they would form somewhat of a friendship, I guess is how you would describe it. They'll often do speeches together about the experiences and all that kind of stuff. So some, I don't want to say good because that's not the right word, but some good did come of it in the fact that there was a meeting of the masses in some way. In 1993, after a 6-year break, Kaczynski mailed a bomb to the home of Charles Epstein from the University of California, and he lost several fingers upon opening the package. The same weekend, he actually mailed a bomb to David, I do not know how to say this, so I apologize, Gulenter, a computer science professor at Yale University. He actually lost an eye and hearing in one ear and a portion of his right hand. Now, in 1994, an executive by the name of Thomas J. Mosser was killed after opening a mail bomb that was sent to his home in New Jersey. In a letter to the New York Times, Ted wrote that he had sent the bomb because of Thomas's work repairing the No, just one sec. Excuse me. Because of Thomas's work repairing the public image of Exxon after the Exxon oil spill. This was then followed by the 1995 murder of Gilbert Brent Murray, the president of the timber industry lobbying group in the California Forestry Association, by a mail bomb that was addressed to a previous president, William Dennison, who had retired. And then geneticist Philip Sharp at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known as MIT, would receive a threatening letter shortly afterwards. So this is where it's going to lead. The manifesto leads to his ultimate arrest. So in 1995, Kaczynski demanded that under the Unabomber, demanded a major newspaper publish his 35,000-word essay, Industrial Society and Its Future, and offered to stop his attacks if his demand was met. Now, despite a lot of controversy, Attorney General Janet Reno and FBI Director Louis Freeh supported its publication for public safety. Now, the Washington Post would publish it, but Penthouse had initially said that they would publish it, but Kaczynski was like, absolutely not. So he typed his manuscript using caps for emphasis and referred to himself as we or FC, Freedom Club. All over America, scholars and students are studying this manifesto, hoping to pinpoint some clue to who the Unabomber was, because all they wanted was that $1 million reward that was offered up by the FBI. David Kaczynski, who is Ted Kaczynski's brother, realized that the manifesto's style and philosophy matched his brother's Ted's. Now, David and his wife, Linda, were horrified that the possibility that Ted has been responsible for this amount of terror and killings, but those similarities were almost undeniable for him. David Kaczynski worried about his brother's link to the Unabomber case, and he would first hire a private investigator, Susan Swanson, to discreetly look into Ted's activities. Estranged for him, David hadn't seen him in almost 10 years at this stage. To gather evidence and reach out to the FBI, he later would engage an attorney. Now, David feared a dangerous FBI raid would it would be bad, because he didn't really know how Ted was going to react to that. He's quite unpredictable at this stage. So in early 1996, this attorney that David had engaged with brought in a former FBI negotiator to compare the Unabomber manifesto to letters from David, manifesto with letters David had received from Ted. The analysis suggested a high probability that the same person wrote both. Now, he would urge the attorney that your client needs to contact the FBI immediately. In February, that attorney gave the FBI a 1971 essay that had been written by Ted Kaczynski, and one of the agents, Joel Moss, noticed the similarities between the essay and the manifesto. Linguistic analysis confirmed that the same author wrote both of those documents. This evidence, along with other details from the bombings and Ted's life, it would end up leading to a search warrant. Now, David Kaczynski initially tried to stay anonymous, but he was really quickly identified, unfortunately. An FBI team interviewed David and his wife in Washington, D.C. David provided letters from Ted, which helped create a timeline of Ted's activities. Now, he developed a respectful relationship with one of the special agents, Kathleen Puckett, meeting her multiple times over nearly 2 months before the federal search warrant was served on his cabin. There is also a documentary on Hulu or Disney Plus in Australia on Kathleen Puckett. I will find it and put it into the comments. On April 30, 1996, agents arrested Theodore Kaczynski at his remote cabin outside Lincoln, Montana. Kaczynski was found very unkept, and a thorough search of his cabin would reveal a significant amount of bomb components, 40,000 handwritten journal pages detailing bomb-making experiments and descriptions of the Unabomber's crimes. One live bomb was actually already ready for mailing. In addition to this, though, investigators found what appeared to be the original typed manuscript of the manifesto. By this time, though, the Unabomber investigation had become one of the most expensive ones in FBI history. The FBI warrant for Kaczynski noted that the experts, including academics, believed someone else had actually written the manifesto. FBI Inspector Terry D. Turchi's affidavit revealed internal conflicts with a small group of agents. They were sure that Kaczynski was the Unabomber, but the rest of the task force were not sure that that was actually the case. So the FBI assured David that his identity would remain anonymous, but it was leaked to CBS News in April 1996. Someone from CBS actually contacted one of the FBI directors who requested a delay before CBS broke the story. The FBI quickly completed and issued a search warrant, and the internal investigation did not reveal who the source was, though, or the leak was. David Kaczynski would actually donate the reward money, minus some expenses, to the victims' families. After his arrest, though, Ted was briefly suspected of being the Zodiac killer, but was ruled out because he lived in Illinois for most of the time that the Zodiac murders occurred. Despite living in the Bay Area from 1967 and 1969 and sharing interest in bombs and codes, their similarities were considered coincidental. He did someone who wrote a really, really fantastic book called Zodiac. He found the parallels interesting, but ultimately really incidental. So probably whoever the Zodiac is probably just as intelligent as Ted Kaczynski. One day I will do a podcast on the Zodiac. I don't have any theories. It just fascinates me. In June 1996, Ted Kaczynski was indicted on 10 counts relating to transporting, mailing, and using bombs. His defense team wanted him to use an insanity plea to avoid the death penalty, but Kaczynski actually refused. And in 1998, he asked to replace his lawyers, Tony Serra, who would focus his anti-technology views instead of insanity. When this request was denied, Kaczynski attempted suicide the next day. Psychiatrist Sally Johnson diagnosed Kaczynski with paranoid schizophrenia, but this has actually been disputed. One of the forensic psychiatrists, Park Diaz, suggested that he had a schizoid or schizotypal personality disorder. Kaczynski actually claimed that 2 prison psychologists found no signs of paranoid schizophrenia, calling the diagnosis ridiculous and political. Some believe that his family portrayed him as mentally ill to save him. So despite these diagnoses, in January 1998, Johnson would, so a judge would declare him competent for trial. Prosecutors would end up they would sort out the death penalty. The next day, he pled guilty to all charges and he received a life sentence without parole. He would later attempt to withdraw that plea, citing coercion, but this was actually denied by the judge and upheld by the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. In 2006, a Judge Burrell ordered items from Kaczynski's cabin to be sold online, excluding the bomb-making materials, and the proceeds went towards the $15 million restitution for Kaczynski's victims. His correspondence and personal papers were also auctioned, but the references to the victims were removed before the sale. He argued unsuccessfully that these redactions violated the freedom of his speech. 2011 auction raised over $232,000. After sentencing, he gave his cabin to someone who happened to be an anti-death penalty activist, but the US government did not allow it to keep it. But in 2011, he was linked to the Chicago Tylenol murders. He initially agreed to provide a DNA sample to the FBI, but later withheld it to gain leverage in his legal disputes over the auctions of his confiscated property. The US government seized his cabin, displaying it in a museum in Washington, D.C. until 2019, where it was moved to the FBI museum nearby. In March 2021, Kaczynski was diagnosed with rectal cancer. After experiencing rectal bleeding, he was moved to the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina in December 2021. He underwent bi-weekly chemotherapy until March 2023, but he stopped due to the side effects and the poor prognosis. In May 2023, a prison oncologist noted his depression and actually recommended a psychiatric evaluation. Side note to this, in 1990, I think it was, Ted Kaczynski's dad actually was diagnosed with cancer, and rather than go through with treatments, his father had actually committed suicide as well. So the reason I say this is because on June 10th in 2023, Kaczynski was found unresponsive in his cell. He'd hung himself with a shoelace from a handicap rail. Prison employees attempted resuscitation, including chest compressions. He was transported to the Duke University Hospital in Durham, North Carolina, where his blood pressure remained low, but he was pronounced dead the following morning at 8:07. While Ted Kaczynski's story is really complex and a controversial one, and his actions as the Unabomber are undeniably horrific and disgusting, his manifesto actually continues to provoke thought and debate about the role of technology in modern society. His legacy endures, a cautionary tale of how brilliant minds can be led down dark paths. One day I will read through that manifesto and I will have my own personal thoughts. I'm not going to share them, but it's definitely one for the ages, I believe. Now, guys, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you like this episode, please hit that like button. If you like this channel, please subscribe. Go and watch the other episodes. I think it's fabulous. I love you all for watching. I hope you have a great weekend, my fellow peanuts. See you later, guys.